talk to you.
Wonderful to have you with us. Thought we would start out with a little breathing this morning. So if you would just sit comfortably for a couple of moments and just breathe. And be grateful for this moment of breath. You know, the breath is happening all the time. You've been breathing since the moment you were born, actually. I breathe almost every day, personally. But you don't think about breathing very much. But it's something that's happening right at this moment. So, in addition to your breath, I'd like you to try some syllables with me. So let's start out with ah. Don't scare your cat or your dog or anyone else who might be in the house, but I want you to just go ah. There's actually some music that goes with this. Ah, ah, ah. Try it again. Ah, ah, ah. That's really great. Now here's another syllable. It's a very Jewish syllable, and it goes like this. I. It's a good way to describe this past week. So if you're feeling it, try this. I, I. Try it again. I. Beautiful. And then the third syllable is just I get it. Okay, a moment of understanding. And this part goes Try it again. Let's put it all together. Now softly. Ah, ah, Take a couple of deep breaths. And just pause for a moment of gratitude. We're actually going to follow over the next few minutes a general flow of a morning service, and we always begin with gratitude and then Psalms. So a little more gratitude right now. Modeh ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shehechazarta bi nishmati v'chemla, rabba emunatecha. Modeh ani lefanecha, 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 modeh ani lefanecha. Take a few deep breaths. Our guest this morning is Norman Fischer. I've been following his work for the last couple of years, and he's written a beautiful translation of the Psalms. And I'm going to welcome him in a moment to share some of those Psalms with us as we sing them as well. If you don't know Norman, he is a poet and a Zen Buddhist priest, and for many years taught at the San Francisco Zen Center, where he served as co-abbot from 1995 to 2000. And he is presently founder and spiritual director of the Everyday Zen Foundation, and he's the author of more than 25 books and a wonderful soul. And he's going to guide us in a few minutes through some meditation. But first, we've reached that point in our service this morning to bring out the deeper meaning of some of the Psalms. And so we're going to begin this morning with Psalm 100. Which says to serve God in joy. Ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, bo'u lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Yalala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. Halala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. Ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, bo'u lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, ivdu et Hashem v'simcha, bo'u lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Yalala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. Yalala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. It's my great joy to introduce Norman Fischer.
Everybody, Psalm 100. All the earth shouts for you. We serve you joyfully. Come into your presence with thanksgiving songs. We know you intimate as all, know we come from you, are you, your people, flock of your pasture, wholly yours. As we enter your gate with thanksgiving songs, enter your court with chants of praise, we offer all our thanks and heap blessings on your unsayableness, for you are goodness, endless kindness, truthfulness, now and throughout the generations.
Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, bo'u lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, bo'u lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Yalala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. Yalala hilalala 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 hiloi loi 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 la la loi, hilalala 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 hiloi loi loi la la loi loi. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. This is a psalm of Shabbat. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Lehagid b'boker chastecha, ve'emunata b'leilot. Lehagid b'boker chastecha, ve'emunata b'leilot. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Lehagid b'boker chastecha, ve'emunata אמונתך בלילות, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות.
Psalm 92. It is good to thank you, good to pronounce your unsayable name, with morning's light to remember your kindness, with night's sky to think of your faithful heart, to sing of it with music, of the 10-stringed instrument, with the psaltery, with the harp. Because you are at work in what is, I rejoice. And the physical world your hands have made animates in my body your preciousness. Everything you have made firm is very great. Everything you have coaxed into thought profound. And only someone humane knows this. A fool cannot see it. When the crooked spring up like weeds, when the heedless like grasses seem to flourish, it is only so that they may be mowed down. But you, who do not rise up and cannot be mowed down, uplift what oppresses you, what opposes you, and it falls and withers, scatters, and is cast away. Knowing this, my resolve is strengthened. Like a ram's horn, freshly anointed, it glistens so that my eyes see clearly the greed of those who envy, and my ears hear patiently the confused cacophony of the world. Those who go in accord with you grow fresh as palm trees, grow tall as the cedars of Lebanon, for they are planted in your house. Their leaves rustle in your courtyards. Even in old age, they'll flourish, vigorous and covered with foliage, emblems of your uprightness, your rock-like steadfastness, sealed and without a crack.
Tov lehodot l'Adonai ולזמר לשמך עליון. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות. להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות. טוב להודות לאדוני, טוב להודות לאדוני. The last line of the last Psalm of David, Psalm 150. Kol ha-neshama tehalel Yah. Usually I would translate that, but we'll wait for Norman Fischer's translation in a moment. Tov lehodot l'Adonai. Kol ha-neshama tehalel Yah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol ha-neshama tehalel Yah. Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Psalm 150, the last psalm. Praise to you in your holiness. Praise throughout your expansive realm. Praise for the power of your doing, for your abundance and everywhereness. All praise. Praise with the blowing of trumpets, praise with the psaltery and harp, praise with timbrel and dance, with stringed instrument and pipe, praise with clear sounding cymbals and with crashing cymbals. Every breath is your praise. Kol haneshama, hallelujah.
Kol haneshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. 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 Gonna ask you now just to sing with me. Hallelujah. 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 Just means praise God. Hallelujah. Magalus. Keep up the hallelujahs. Me'odam ku machshevotecha. Hallelujah. 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 This brings us to a point in our service where we normally would do the Shema. So let's do Shema, but let's do it a little differently this morning. Another way to think of the word Shema is not just to listen or hear, but to pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening in this moment. What is present for you this morning? What is present in your thoughts, in your emotions? Can you just look at that without judgment and just Shema, just pay attention? The second word in Shema is, of course, Yisrael. Yisrael is us. We are those who struggle. We struggle with God, and we struggle with understanding this world. But the word struggle has in it the meaning of effort. So pay attention, those who struggle. Pay attention to this moment and to the divine presence in this moment. And let's say Shema together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם, emet. And so we go from this moment of divine attention and thanks and gratitude from the earlier prayers to a moment of inner reflection. We normally call it Amidah, which means standing prayer. For this morning, I think it's okay to sit, and to guide us through that sit and the inner journey. So pleased to have with us this morning poet, Buddhist teacher, and wonderful guest this morning, Norman Fischer. Norman, would you please take us on that journey?
Thanks, Cantor Phil. So let's do some silent meditation. Probably we're going to do it for a long time. well, maybe an infinite amount of time, longer than you would expect. And I'll give some guidance along the way. And I'll start us with a meditation bell. So begin by really practicing Shema, listening as deeply and as clearly as you can to the sound of the bell, even though it's communicated to you over the internet here. One of the blessings of the Amidah is gathering in the exiles, the sense of gathering together what's dispersed. So let's begin by practicing that gathering in. So bring all the awareness of your heart, of your mind, right here to your body. So notice your butt sitting on the chair. Notice your feet on the floor or wherever your feet are. Notice your lower leg, your shins, your calves, the heavy bones of the knees, the thighs, and the pressure of the seat on your rear end. And to whatever extent it's possible for you, to sit up straight in your chair, lifting your spine. So there's a feeling of energy and awareness going up and down your spinal column, just like Yaakov dreaming of the angels ascending and descending the ladder of the spine to heaven and earth, and heaven and earth, and grounding the spirit in the body. Feel your spine. See if you can visualize in your mind's eye and feel in your body the spine at the top of your head, just resting on the spine, your chin tucked in a little bit, sitting up straight to the best of your ability. And feel your hands. Maybe they're resting on your lap, folded, or on your thighs, one hand on each side. Notice your fingers Very likely you can feel the pulse in your fingertips. The immense circulation of your blood through 25,000 miles of veins and capillaries in your body. 25,000 miles. Feel your shoulders. If you notice any tension in them, try to relax if possible. And just notice the wonderful stillness and peace that gently falls all around you when you gather your attention right here to the body, when you bring in all the exiled attention that's been absorbed without your knowing it here and there with worries and concerns and distractions and bits and pieces of this and that. But when you gather it in right here to the body, the stillness that is natural to you, the God-given stillness, spontaneously appears. And now begin to notice, as we were noticing earlier this morning, the breathing. Feel the breathing. Maybe you can feel it as a coolness at the nostrils, a lifting and a filling in the chest, and maybe most deeply, a gentle rising and falling in the belly. This breath that is praise of God, because breath is soul. Breath is soul. That's how we became human. God breathed breath into us. When we inhale, God is exhaling. When we exhale, God is inhaling. What a beautiful, gentle, natural rhythm. Every time we breathe in, we're saying yes to life, refreshing our life. And every time we breathe out, we're letting go of everything that's no longer needed for this life in this moment. Emptying ourselves out, giving ourselves to God, and then another in-breath, and out-breath, and in, and out, and in and out. And if while you're sitting, you get a little bored or your body wants to twitch and move and scratch and rub your face, if possible, try not to do that. Try to stay still. And just be with the breath and the feeling of the body. The sitting intensifies if you commit yourself to staying still without moving. And it dissipates when you fidget around and start making lists of things you need to do and so on. Those things will arise naturally, but when they do, just notice them and come back. Tshuva, right? Come back. Return to the breath, to the body, to presence. Presence. And if you were sitting up pretty straight and now you notice you're slouching, just gently lift yourself up again. And if in your mind come thoughts or complaints of various sorts, don't suppress them. Don't think you're somehow supposed to have a pure, clean mind. No, whatever is in your mind right now is what's supposed to be there. On the other hand, don't indulge those thoughts and fidgets. Notice them. Thank you very much. But I'm going back to breathing and to presence. When we breathe in, we say yes to life. When we breathe out, we let go of life. Every breath, we live and die. This is the truth. Every breath is a rebirth and a death of the previous moment of our lives. Life and death happen every moment. We call that time. We live in time. The great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said that time is the realm of God. This continual living and dying that we don't even notice. But it's there in every breath, every soul moment. Can we face it? Can we really be there for it? Our real life. Or is it too much? Now for the last few minutes of our meditation, of our Amidah, let's practice Shema. Literally listening to the silence. Listening to whatever sounds there may be in the room in which you're sitting, inside the room or outside the room. Perhaps the sound and the feeling of your heartbeat or your breath. Perhaps the silence itself. But don't just listen with your ears. Listen with your whole body. Make your whole body an ear. Receptive, attentive. Hearing the sounds. Hearing the echad, the oneness in the sounds. Just for a few more minutes and then we'll stop. And now to end, I'm going to strike my bell again 3 times. And now when I do that, please listen all the way till the end of the sound, when the sound dissolves into the silence 3 times, and then we'll stop. Thank you all very much.
If there is anyone who is saying Kaddish at the present time, I ask you to rise for Kaddish. Yikadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Ah,
V'yalma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei.
eh,
V'chayechon v'yomechon v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam alomei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei kudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiram v'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'himru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'himru amen. Yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yada lai lai lai, yada lai 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 lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai, yada lai lai lai, yada lai 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 lai. Well, that concludes the service portion of this morning. And it's been such a great pleasure. And your words have jumped out at me over time. And I want to share with those of you who are here this morning. First of all, that as I said, Norman Fischer has written some 25 books. His most recent one is this one. And I don't know if you're seeing it backwards or not, but I'll read it for you. And it's "The World Could Be Otherwise." And the striking thing for me is that how much of the Buddhist philosophy that Norman brings forth in the book, it actually fits really quite well with the Jewish prayer practice. And so, Norman, I wanted to ask you some questions about your book. And Rabbi Feinstein will be joining us in about 5 or 10 minutes. But I wanted to mention that just in reading the introduction to your book of Psalms, something jumped out at me that was quite remarkable. And it's this idea of sovereignty. You know, one of the things that many people struggle with, I know my wife, Michelle, struggles with it quite a bit, is this idea of sovereignty, of this kingship. And certainly at one time, we all connected very much with kingship. But in a sense of prayer, it's hard for some people to imagine that we have a king. After all, we're Americans. We rejected kings a long time ago. And you frame it really beautifully here because you bring up that issue in your introduction. And you said, I began to think that the sovereignty of God referred to in the Psalms, so the Psalms written some 3,000 years ago, that this was a species of consciousness beyond the human, yet not separate from it. a kind of settled and steady contemplation or union with the deity constantly evoked and longed for in the Psalms. And you said, I came to think that the enemies mentioned in the Psalms were external, but also internal. Praying for their defeat could be seen to be akin to praying, as in Tibetan Buddhism, to fierce guardian deities to destroy the powerful inner passions that keep one in bondage. And you certainly, in your Psalm 23 translation, um, uh, many beautiful images here, but in the normal translation, we say, you prepare a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. That's often what you see in the sort of King James way of saying it. And here you change it. You say, you prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity. And that just jumped out at me and really spoke to me, in that it is often the inner enemy that we have to face. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Hmm. Um, sure. It's hard to know where to start. For one thing, anybody who's a writer knows about this problem, that you write something and then you're a different person the next day, and 10 or 15 years later, you're very different. And yet you're always held responsible for that poor schmo 20 years ago, something that you now have to defend, So I don't defend myself for what I've written previously. So I see it differently now. And what I see in this, I'm more impressed than I was then with this idea of sovereignty. Because the older I get, the more I can tell that it is built into me and everybody that I ever met, because we know somehow that we're vulnerable and that our lives are over in 5 minutes, and everything we've ever done blows away like a leaf on a tree. We all know this, even though we try not to think about it. And if we're lucky, we can spend our entire life without ever thinking about it, but we know it. Therefore, we seek sovereignty. We have to seek sovereignty. We have to seek a sense of the ultimate grounding and meaning of what we are as human beings. That's human beings. To me, it's built into being human beings. That's why whatever human community you ever saw anywhere, anytime, has a religion. Because human beings just know instinctively that we seek something that we cannot find in the smallness of our lives. We can only find it in the largeness of our lives. So that's why we have religion. That's why we have God. That's why the Psalms are looking to a sovereign to confer sovereignty on us. And so how does this connect with the idea of enemies? Nowadays we have, now they are always, I actually do not believe this myself. But if you read the paper and talk to your friends, everybody will say the country is so divided. Everybody has enemies. You're on one side or the other, and you hate the other guys, right? That's part of this, right? Part of this seeking for sovereignty is the need to define an enemy so that we can, we can elevate ourselves in our righteousness over our enemy.
So how does the spiritual path help us to overcome that instinct?
Well, I think that the spiritual path helps us to see that if God is one, if Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad means anything at all, it means there's nothing outside of God, right? So our enemies are also God. They may be enemies. We may oppose them. We may have to stand up righteously and oppose their views and so on, and policies and so on and so on. But we don't hate them. We don't see them as anything other than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And as a manifestation of our humanness,
right?
Projection of our humanness. Hmm. So yes, there's good and there's evil, and there's something to uphold and something to reject. But all of it is contained within the oneness of God, so that there's always a sense of peace and a sense of loving heart even when we're in the street. I mean, the example of Martin Luther King and of Gandhi and people like that who were spiritual warriors for the right, who never were overcome by hatred or animosity toward those they opposed, and they opposed them with their entire lives, literally sacrificing their lives, both of those two figures,
Right.
for what they thought was right, and yet never with hatred.
Right.
So that's how I look at these things.
Mhm. So is part of our task to overcome that adversity within ourselves, just
Yeah.
to return to your translation a little bit, and so that we can be that person that can see beyond the self.
Mhm. And I think that the Yisrael in the Shema is the struggle toward that. We're not there. None of us could claim to be there. And certainly as a Jewish people, we're not there. And certainly as a humanity, we're not there. So it is a struggle. I think the Shema, acknowledges that this is a struggle, that we are a journey. We're on the journey of struggle toward appreciation of this oneness. And we work hard at it. I hope we all do anyway.
Mhm.
And we're getting there. I believe we're getting there, but it's a long haul.
So I want to ask you about this word struggle versus the word suffering. Okay. Buddhism talks a great deal about suffering, and it's on my mind a lot lately that struggle is a good thing. It makes us better. We never reach perfection, so struggle is a part of that. Is struggle a way to avoid suffering, would you say? And what is the context of suffering within Buddhism? I'm struggling myself to understand that.
Mm. Well, Buddhism starts out with suffering. Uh, one of my reflections about the relationship between Judaism and theistic traditions and Buddhism, which is a non-theistic tradition. The difference is that Buddhism starts with being human and works its way up. Judaism, theistic traditions start with God and work their way down, So it's really the same thing, only coming from the opposite direction.
Hmm.
So Buddhism, you probably all know the story of the Buddha's life and journey. It really starts with suffering. It starts with the Buddha recognizing, oh, suffering is a part of human life that is absolutely indelible and unpreventable. We die. That's painful. That's scary. Nobody overcomes that. No matter how well you organize your life and how perfectly everything goes, you do not avoid old age and death and loss. You can't. What do we do about that? How do we take that into account in our living? And that's where the path of the Buddha began. And then he sought through his meditations and understanding of life a way to cope with and overcome in some real way that suffering, but not by somehow magically living forever as a young man, but through truly and deeply understanding what suffering is.
Hmm.
We overcome suffering.
Hmm.
And so
So,
that kind of struggle is necessary.
right. So struggle is a way of overcoming suffering, would you say?
Through suffering, overcoming suffering.
Uh-huh. Thank you for clarifying that. And so I want to ask you about your experience with with the Zen Center in San Francisco and your relationship with Rabbi Alan Liu. You seem to embody, in some sense, that Buddhist path, going this way, and yet your Jewishness is very deep in you as well. And so, how did you find yourself on the path of becoming a Buddhist, and how did you maintain your relationships with the Jewish community at the same time?
Another long story I could go on. The hard part here is like distilling this into something that makes sense in short order. So, a lot of people who took to Buddhism in the 60s and 70s, like I did, rejected Judaism or whatever their religion was, thought it was somehow meaningless or corrupt, or a lot of people were actually in one way or another abused by their religion. You know, maybe they had a mean rabbi or something who made them feel small or whatever. So they ran away. I never had that experience. I always had, for some reason, an enormously positive sense of being Jewish, what Judaism was and what it was to me and who I was. I never, that was something I never questioned or doubted. But when I was young and had, deep existential crises, it somehow never occurred to me that Judaism could address this. So it wasn't that I rejected Judaism or didn't think it was, something I was or loved. I just thought, well, I have, a problem that Judaism doesn't have anything to do with, so I better seek other solutions to this problem. And that's how I got involved in practicing meditation. And I never intended, I wasn't trying to be a Buddhist, or I didn't like gurus or religions or anything like that, but I was compelled by the power of the practice of sitting in silence intensively. It did speak to my existential and philosophical issues. And so as I continued with it step by step by step, until I was satisfied, I was never going to stop. And as I continued, because I'm stubborn, Jewish people, very stubborn people. So as I continued step by step by step, I gathered up all these various, paraphernalia and so on and so on. And then I became a Buddhist priest and so forth and so on. But I never, the whole time, said I'm not a Jew anymore. That never occurred to me, and it was only by a deep contemplation of the emptiness teachings in Buddhism that I thought it was even possible to undertake commitments in Buddhism, because I realized that the commitments were empty of any, substantiality, so that I wasn't like converting. I didn't convert to Buddhism. How could you do that? I didn't, that's not what I thought I was doing. And that's what I understood, is the emptiness of Buddhism allowed me to take up Buddhism as a fake identity, an empty identity.
So
In the meantime, while I was doing all this, I maintained my close friendship with Rabbi Lu. We were Zen students together, and then, a long story, which you can read about in his book, he became a rabbi. And again, you can only imagine that this was God's work. He comes back to San Francisco, and we started doing events together, and we started doing meditation together, and we founded a Jewish meditation center together that is still going in his absence of 12 years now. So he, our Jewish meditation center, before we started the center, we used to do events called Translating Judaism, Translating Buddhism. Because there were so many Jews involved with Buddhism, we thought we'd do events that would bring together Jews and Judaism and Buddhism practiced by Jews. So we had these events, and they were really, really popular. We would get large audiences. But the same thing would happen every time. We didn't realize what we were doing, but what we were actually doing was providing Jews who were practicing Buddhism and were really pissed off at Judaism a chance to complain about Judaism. Because when they went to their Buddhist centers, nobody wanted to hear them complain about Judaism. It was totally irrelevant. They weren't going to complain about Judaism in a Buddhist center. Why would you do that? But when we had our events, Translating Judaism, Translating Buddhism, we were inviting them to complain about Judaism. So that's what they did. And every single event we had was very emotional. And poor Rabbi Lu could not find a way to avoid defending the faith. So at the end of all our events, he would be exhausted, I would be happy. I was saying, oh, look, we're doing a good job for these people. We're giving them a chance to vent and express themselves. They've been probably wanting to do this for 25 years and now they're doing it. It's great. And he said, yeah, good for you, but it's killing me. So I didn't quite believe that he was taking it as hard as he was. But eventually he said, I can't do it anymore.
Hmm.
We have to stop doing this. I said, oh, that's too bad. He said, but I understand. So then about a year later, he said, we're going to start again. I said, good. He said, but it's going to be different this time. I said, how will it be different? He said, this time, it won't be translating Judaism, translating Buddhism. It will be Jewish meditation. So it's Jewish meditation. We're not inviting the Buddhist Jews to come in and complain about Judaism. We're inviting them to be Jews meditating. And if they don't want to do that, they're not going to come. I said, brilliant. You're absolutely right. I said, the only thing is that, in our other retreats, I used to talk about Buddhism, which I know a little about, but I'm really ignorant about Judaism. So you'll talk and I'll just meditate, I said, no, you'll talk too. I said, how can I talk about Judaism? I don't know anything about Judaism, really. I mean, I went to shul as a kid, but I was bar mitzvah, but what is it? Jewish person, the average Jewish person knows nothing, right, about Judaism unless they went to Cheder and so on. And I had a terrible Jewish education. He said, well, you'll study. I said, what a brilliant idea. That's a great idea. So then I started studying Judaism. And I love to study Judaism. Judaism is so brilliant and so wonderful. It's the most fun, the most interesting thing in the world. So now at the Jewish Meditation Center, from that time on, I started talking only about Jewish themes in Torah and whatever else I was reading or studying. It's vast, of course. And I would only spotlight onto some very small thing that I knew. But that's what I do now. I study Judaism for my Jewish. We still have the center, and we still continue. We have now Rabbi Dorothy Richmond, who works with us in Rabbi Lou's stead. But when I do Jewish retreats, I only speak about Judaism and Jewish text and so forth and so on. And I have for a few decades, but I'm still pretty ignorant. But at least I can say something. I have some basic ideas in my mind.
So how does your Buddhist training inform your Jewish journey at this point?
Well, that's the important part, right? So I was going to read to you, maybe it's too boring to do it, I won't do it, but the opening pages of Rabbi Lou's book, Be Still and Get Going. It's his book about Jewish meditation. He opens with the famous story about, which I won't go into, it's tell it right, it takes time. Anyway, what he felt was that Judaism as a transformative, very deep spiritual path is totally intact. It's just that the average contemporary Jewish person can't see it. It's right in front of you, but you can't see it. And that was my case, right? In fact, Judaism did address the things that I was concerned with when I was 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. It was right there, but I couldn't see it. And nobody ever pointed it out to me. So how do you see it? Well, Judaism has always involved a tremendous amount of practice and learning, right? Shul 3 times a day, Torah portion, yeshivot, etc., etc., etc. Judaism assumes an enormous amount of commitment and learning and being immersed in prayer. Then it all makes sense,
Right.
For the person like myself or the average American Jew or maybe Israeli Jew or the Jew anywhere in the world who's not a religious, person, deeply steeped in it, how are you going to see it? And the answer for us was through meditation. When you sit in silence and you make that into a practice, you will see more deeply into yourself. And through seeing more deeply into yourself, you will understand what Judaism has been saying from the very beginning, plainly, but you just couldn't hear it.
We didn't learn it in Hebrew school, did we?
In Hebrew school, and most people's Jewish education doesn't include it. And I think a person could very well go through a full, deep Jewish education and still not see it. Because the great teachers who bring it forth, maybe they never met those teachers.
Right.
There in the Hasidic literature, it's there. You have to look to find it, but it's there. The interpretation is there in a lot of different places. But the meditation really helps to open you to it. So to read Torah, for example, through the lens of meditation, through the lens of your own experience as a human being, if God is one, it means that God is there every moment of your life. You know, it's not like all of a sudden a crisis and you see a light shining from above. It's like there literally in every breath, in every moment of consciousness. And the meditation helps you to open to this. And once you open to that, then you open up the Torah and you say, oh my God, it's there in the Torah. I just didn't see it. So that's what we were undertaking with Makor Or, our center. And I think now, as you know, there's a whole very lively Jewish meditation movement with many, many, many great rabbis who are pursuing this path themselves and opening us up to these interpretations. So it's a really beautiful time now in Judaism. In the United States, I don't know how it is in Israel, it's a whole different situation. But in the United States, I'm aware of a very vibrant and awake movement among committed Jews to re-envision Judaism and feel it in a contemporary way.
Someone in the chat has asked, what is it that people are angry about with Judaism? There are a lot of questions there. I mean, the Holocaust certainly informed some of us who grew up at that, post-war. And as you said, you may have had perhaps a teacher in Hebrew school who was mean to you. You make these judgments as a young person, as a child, as an adolescent. And sometimes don't even look at the deeper things that are going on with Judaism. It's like Rabbi Feinstein, when kids come to the rabbi and say, I don't believe in God. And he said, well, who's the God you don't believe in? And I think it's that way with Judaism too. What is the Judaism that you've learned that you're rejecting?
Another thing
question.
In our painful for Rabbi Lou retreats, we found out that a lot of people who were mad at Judaism were mad at their parents, their Jewish parents. And there wasn't in their minds really any difference between being mad at their parents and being mad at Judaism. It ended up being the same thing. So that was a lot of it, actually.
That's a great point. And you were speaking about great teachers earlier. I wonder if Rabbi Feinstein is joining us. Ilana Forspan, are you there?
It's Ilana
Here,
Zimmerman.
Phil.
Rabbi is there. He's here.
Great.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Rabbi.
Good morning, Norman.
Hi, Rabbi. You are Valley Beth Shalom. That's you, Rabbi.
Yeah, it's my moniker.
Yeah, okay. Now I see you. Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed your teaching, your Torah. First of all, it's wonderful to meet a Hamish Buddhist. And I've really enjoyed your teaching. I'm coming on now because I was leading a service earlier this morning. So I apologize if any of this is duplicated, but you can't hear it enough. I wonder if I could ask you just a couple of questions. In your book, your most recent book, you said something which really surprised me. It's the reason I read past the first page. Usually when you read a book on faith or religion, you start out with a call to faith or a call to belief or a call to observance. And you talked about imagination as the most important component. Imagination as the essence of this. Would you talk about that a bit? What's the role of imagination in the life of the soul?
Thank you for that question, Rabbi. Well, it's a little complicated to respond because first, what does the word imagination mean? What are we talking about when we talk about the imagination? And I actually did a bit of research. In fact, I'm still involved in this research. I've been reading lately Spinoza, who had a concept in his thought of the imagination. So the imagination, the word imagination is a concept in European and English language that has a wide variety of interpretations over the generations. Right now, most people, when you say imagination, they think, oh, that's the opposite of reality. There's the real and there's the imagined. There's no such thing as Mickey Mouse, but I can imagine Mickey Mouse, and Walt Disney could draw Mickey Mouse. You're down there in Southern California, Mickey Mouse land, so you know about Mickey Mouse, right? Well, I'm redefining the idea of the imagination. I'm saying that imagination is a function of the human heart and soul that brings the world to life, that lights up a world for us. We actually, in a sense, and now psychologists, cognitive psychologists now affirm that in some very real way, we are making up the world. Raw data comes in, we put it together in our minds, and we create a world. So there's an element of, and Kant and other philosophers over the generations saw this too, before the cognitive scientists confirmed it. We are, something in us makes the world. Then the question becomes, what is the quality of our imagination, and what is the world that we're making? So right now, I think the entire world, religious and otherwise, has a scientific, rational viewpoint on the world, materialistic viewpoint, rational, scientific, materialistic viewpoint on the world. In fact, to some extent, that is an imaginative viewpoint. So what I'm arguing in the book is that there's this element of humanity that has been with us from the very beginning. As I said a minute ago, before you came on, every single group of human beings ever, small or large, anywhere at any time, has a religion of some sort, because something in us knows we need to create a dimension for the world beyond the material if we're going to live in it and not kill ourselves as we seem to be doing. And so religion is the fountainhead and the original and the most powerful dimension of human imagination that gives us a world that has meaning and that we can live in. And so I'm arguing then, as a writer and as a poet, that the imaginative arts, all of the arts, which originally were part of spirituality and still are to a great extent, but now we've factored them off and made them secular, are part of this imaginative practice that human beings need. So we actually need to reimagine the world, make the world bigger and more ineffable than we've made it. I think one of the interesting things that's going on right now, that, in the pandemic, is we're all learning about science, right? In a way that scientists knew about it, but the average person like myself didn't know this. We thought science was like answers to problems. What's the problem? Here's the answer. Well, now we find out that the answer is different every single day, right? The science in the pandemic is moving so fast that the average person is completely confused about exactly what's going on. It changes. Science is not an exact science. Science is a procedure and a process that yields an ever-changing, ever-transforming aspect of knowledge. So science itself is imaginative. So anyway, I'm trying to, it's a subtle point, but I'm trying to redefine the imagination as something that we all need and something that we all do, and to see past the smallness of our views about who we are and what the world is. We need to see past that. And religion does that through myth and through text study and through all kinds of, Judaism is amazing in its capacity to reimagine the world constantly through the Torah. The Torah is the most flexible, expansive text ever written, right? Unbelievable. The things that people, I know the poet Kenneth Rexroth, who was not a Jew and actually hated the Old Testament, so-called Old Testament. You know, he hated it. It was so full of violence and bloody and, you know, small-minded, narrow-minded God. He hated the Old Testament. And he said, when he did a review once of a book by Martin Buber about Hasidism, and he said, somehow the Hasids have managed to read this text, the Torah, and find that it says the opposite of what it actually says. They figured out that it says the opposite. He was very mad about this, but it's true. You know, the Torah says, who knows what the Torah said? The Peshat is just the beginning of Torah, right? So we need to do this with our own lives. We need to read our own lives. Let's put it this way. We're all living our lives based on the Peshat, period. You know, we're not reading our lives with the other 4 levels of interpretation, or 3 levels of interpretation. We're only reading it with 1 level of interpretation. We need the imagination, just the same way we apply imagination to the text. We need to apply imagination to the text of our own lives and live in the world that we live in and see it on all dimensions. And that's the argument of the book. And then I say, and that's what the spiritual path, as a way of life, as a practice, that's what it's all about. It's about learning how to read our lives on all levels, on deeper levels that we're missing now. They're there, we're living it, but we're just not seeing it. And therefore we're living it incorrectly. That's a long-winded answer, Rabbi. I'm sorry, I went on something.
Just the beginning, actually, because it was beautifully said. So I read the book. I read the book several times, actually. And, you know, you make the statement in the book that there are 6 pathways.
Yeah.
How do you say them? Paramitas? Is that what they say it?
So that's a Buddhist, template for the spiritual path. And, you know, you could map onto that various Jewish templates.
Yeah. And you say each of them is important, but the first one is generosity.
Right.
And I have to say that I read generosity and I read it again and I read it a 3rd time. And if anybody buys the book, you've got to read it 3 times. Because the first time you just read it to figure out what he's trying to say. But you say, oh, that's obvious. And then the second time you read it and you say, oh, no, wait a minute. There's something that's completely not obvious here. And it's only on the 3rd reading, I have to tell you, the 3rd reading, where you stop and say, oh, no, wait a minute. Now he's really said something. The generosity chapter, just remarkable, especially at this moment, because people are so depressed and so constricted and so bereft because of what's going on, the COVID and the politics. And you show up and say, open yourself, get over the self, get out of the prison of the self, and something changes in the world. Could you take a moment and riff on that? Because that was such a beautiful insight.
Right. I was saying earlier, I don't, this probably maybe before you came on too, I was saying that people say and read and think that the world is, we've never been more divided than we are now. And I don't believe that at all. I don't see that, and I don't believe that. Now, I see the same thing everybody else sees. I'm not, you know, seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. Believe me, I see the suffering, and I see the pain, and I see the wrong-headedness and the violence. I see it, and I feel it. So it's not that I'm pretending that none of this exists, but I'm not putting it together the way it's put together in the newspaper. I'm putting it together through the lens of my own spiritual practice. So, yes, when you see the world differently, because your daily activity of spiritual practice is reinforcing a different view, you take the same set of facts and the same set of tragedies, and you see them differently. So, for instance, I'm not saying here that I see only sweetness and light and perfection. I see that, but I also see the tragedy. So in our time, I mean, I so appreciate, like, you know, this is a genius thing, right? Think about this. Anytime you ever go to any Jewish service, at the end of the service, just like this morning, somebody says, now let's practice grieving. Every day, 3 times a day. Now let's practice grieving. Now let's acknowledge death, loss, violence, pain. Let's acknowledge it. Let's bring it into our service. Let's look at the people who are feeling this most strongly in our community, and let's honor them as they stand up and recite a prayer about how great God is. Doesn't have a word in it about grief, right? I mean, what an amazing practice. So I say this to people all the time. This is a time to practice grieving. Grief should be a daily practice for anybody who's paying attention. Every day we should be grieving what's happening to our environment. We should be grieving the pain and the violence in the souls of a lot of our fellow human beings. We should be grieving the suffering of COVID every single day. And when COVID is over, suffering won't be over, illness won't be over. It goes on and on. So grieving is an active part of spiritual practice, just as it is so wisely in Judaism. So grieving is part of this. But grieving doesn't mean that there isn't a beautiful journey in our human world. I think we're on a beautiful journey together. And all of this that's going on that's so painful is very much a part of that journey. We don't get over this stuff. We go through it. So I'm actually, to me, I'm seeing the world more and more full of caring, more and more full of human beings who care about one another, more and more full of human beings who are willing to look at the whole world and see the suffering and do whatever they can to address it. This is, the vision of humanity that's in the Torah, to me, is slowly but surely coming to pass. And part of it involves going through these narrow, that's the 23rd Psalm. I'm going through this narrow place, and I'm sitting down at a table in the face of my adversity and my adversaries. But you're there with me, and we're getting there. And that's what I see. So I'm not ignoring anything, but I'm just configuring it differently. And that's what the imaginative practice of spirituality is to do for us. It gives us real hope, and it gives us sustaining power to keep going. And not only with endurance and gritting our teeth, but with a sense of joy. We were reading the Psalms this morning, right? Every day, every Shabbos, the joy of spirituality, the joy of being human. That's there right alongside the grief. That's us, right? Grieving, joyful, one breath after another. That's us.
In one of your poems, I found this beautiful poem that you wrote, and you have a very arresting line at the very beginning. You said, "God arrives in the transitions."
Oh my God, you found that poem. How could you find that poem?
Well, I'm a rabbi. I'm good at this.
Oh my God, yeah. I was going to read the poem today. I found it in one of my books. Yeah.
Could you explain that? What does that mean? That, and the rest of the poem is beautiful, but just that line, God arrives in the transitions.
I'm reading proof for my, somebody's doing my selected poems, 30 years of poems from 1980 to 2013. So I just read this poem in there. It's short, so I'll read it. And the title of the poem is How God Gets Into It. How God Gets Into It. God arrives in the transitions, the times between, before and after, the shatterings, bendings, breakings, moments of devilment and blasted pose. The feeling then arises, a draft in the system, tiny shaft of light in the visual field, which, when noticed and affirmed, opens out to an aura on the screen of eclectic ineffability. One's arms open in quietude and perplexity. There's nothing to say, do, or think. And that's in this book, Slowly But Dearly, which you can probably hard to find, but If you go to normanfischer.org, all my books are there and you can get them. In the middle of every moment is a transition, right? Like when we were meditating, I was saying, you know, we literally actually live and die on every moment. It goes so fast, we don't see it. But there is a moment of transition on every moment when we let go and come back and let go and come back. That's called time. You know, we look in the mirror and we, you know, because we saw the same face more or less yesterday, we forget that we're not seeing the same face we saw 35 years ago. How did that happen? It's really a kind of act of magic, right? How could something like that happen? Time is like magic, because in every moment of time, there is this ineffable transition that our ancestors tried to understand and call God. And that's why meditation, if you can be present with the breath in that moment, you feel somehow that sense of the awesomeness of being alive. I mean, I think that's what our ancestors felt on Sinai collectively, the awesomeness. It's even almost scary, you know, being alive and dying all the time. In that moment, which is in every moment, really, and yet is eternal, God appears, or God comes in those moments of transition. And we're awestruck by it. And like I say at the end of the poem, we just open our arms. We don't know what to say. You can't say anything. Anytime you try to explain it or say anything, you're always wrong. So you just open your arms. And then as soon as you even say, oh, I just experienced that, then you're already wrong again, you know, because it's gone. That's what I was trying to talk about in the poem. Thank you for looking up one of my poems. I'm astonished. My poems are extremely obscure. They're very hard.
That's why I asked you to help me understand it. So
Right.
that one's very, very vivid.
That
Very
one's
vivid.
easy to understand. Let me read you something else, as long as I'm reading poems. Okay, short bit. This is also about God, and this is a short bit. Also, I'm reading, you know, my selected poems. It's from a very long poem called "Ask a Difficult Question," and the poem goes on for maybe 25 pages. But here's a section of it that's very much a Jewish meditation on Judaism. And maybe you can hear this. And they believed in the words that reminded them, said, pay attention to what has been told, to what has been passionately repeated and sung, what has been sounded out on trumpets. Pay attention to that. Do not imagine or construct anything, because you cannot make anything that is not tainted by wild desire. It is not new, running along another road. But remember the story of what's been repeated in the comfort of authority. Be bound in that for the goodness it brings. Being a fine person is that, held in the flaming words of how you are. Be that. In the town, create people to depend on, to use for the going of the entanglement of where you are to go. A white piece of cloth, only knotted that way. Call it a name, but do not say the name. Know it, but do not think of it as a name. Can you hear that? I think you could perfectly well understand what I'm getting at there. Yeah.
Not obscure at all.
Yeah. Good.
I wonder, Rabbi and Norman, would it be okay if we take some questions?
Oh yes, of course, of course.
Yeah. I I'll just read a couple of things that are in the chat here. One particular thing from it's Dennis Gora quoting C.S. Lewis: "Reason is the natural order of truth, but imagination is the organ of meaning."
Yes, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish I found that one before for my book. Yeah, too late now, but thank you.
And various questions. Karen wants to know how is it that you can you can bring forth love toward people who do bad things. We've seen some of that this week, that people violate the norms, and are they deserving of love, and how do we love them?
I think they are. And if you ever had a child and you went to the playground with your child, and your child picked up a toy truck in the playground and whacked another kid over the head with it, you, watching the child, probably were really dismayed and jumped up and grabbed the truck away from the child and said, "No, no, no, don't do that. We don't hurt people. Don't do that." But you didn't not love your child. You knew that it was a bad thing to do, and you were maybe a little angry with your child at that moment. But you didn't hate your child, right, in that moment, and you didn't say, "I don't love my child" in that moment. Well, I think it's just like that. You look at the world and you see literally, like, the people who do the stuff like that they did the other day in the Capitol. These are children. I mean, yes, they're adults, and yes, they broke the law. I think they should go to jail. Don't get me wrong. But in my heart, I understand that they're children.
Hmm.
And that they really don't know what they're doing. They really, really, really and truly don't know what they're doing. And I don't hate them. I really don't hate them.
Hmm. Well, that leads to another question from Sherry here. She's quoting from your book, so she's done her homework. Anger brings us to the heart of the human condition.
Yes.
Could you
Right.
explain that? Could you
Right.
elaborate on that?
Right. So when I say what I just said about how I don't hate those people, I love them. Then you could say, okay, well, then we should never feel anger, and we should be a good spiritual person and love our neighbor. But wait, I'm angry. I'm really angry. I'm really frightened and I'm really angry. I shouldn't be feeling that. No, 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 I shouldn't be feeling that. No, whatever we feel, we should be feeling.
Hmm.
We should turn to that feeling and understand it and own it. And anger brings us to our human vulnerability. We're only ever angry because we're terrified.
Hmm.
Anger is a mask for terror. Because if I'm terrified, I'm cowering in a corner. But if I'm mad, I can go out there and beat somebody up. So I'm strong when I'm mad, and that's how I overcome my terror.
Mm-hmm.
So, and human vulnerability is at the heart of what we are. That's why our anger is very important. Now, to make a life out of our anger is terrible. It's bad for your health. It's bad for all your human relationships. You don't want to make anger into a way of life. But when you feel angry, because that's what you're feeling, you have to own that feeling. You have to study it. You have to understand it. And eventually, you won't feel it anymore if you are on a path, a spiritual path in which understanding your anger and appreciating it is part of that path. Eventually, you'll overcome it.
Right. Thank you. Mark has asked, is imagination essentially our soul speaking to us?
Beautiful way to put it. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yes. And so.
Yes. Great. Thank you. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat. Rabbi Feinstein, any final questions?
I have many, many more, but I really want to let other people have a chance because it's such an opportunity. But yeah, there you go.
Here we go. We are getting more questions here. Someone, Ozzy wants to know, where can I find the first poem that the rabbi mentioned and that Norman recited? Is that the book you held up, Norman?
Yeah, slowly but dearly.
Right, and it's at normanfisher.com, is that correct?
NormanFischer.org. If you go to normanfischer.org, it's my author page, and it's got all the books there. And it should be possible to go to that page, click on the book, and it'll send you to a small press distribution in Berkeley where you can order it.
Great. And we will post it on our website. In fact, we'll make sure that we have all of your links and so forth up on our website so people can find out more. Another couple of questions here. This one is from Lane, and Lane says, practicing Judaism and Zen, there's a fruitful overlap. In particular, the teachings by the Musar rabbis and Buddhist masters, for example, a similar treatment of Kshati Paramita, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, and the quality of Salvanut, patience.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Musar, and is there in fact a fruitful overlap?
Oh, absolutely. Musar is a wonderful tradition, very, very wise. And as I started to say to the rabbi, there's a lot of overlap between the 6 paramitas in Buddhism and the virtues in all the traditions. You know, there's always a lot of overlap in the virtues, human virtues that are to be cultivated, and the reflection that God is the stronghold of those virtues. In practicing patience, we're trying to imitate God. In practicing generosity and kindness and love, we're trying to imitate God. And so I think most spiritual traditions have that concept and that idea. And there's a lot of overlap. And I would say that I've done Musar practice, and we've done it in the core or quite a bit. And it is really enhanced by meditation. Because when you practice meditation as a regular practice, it just gives you a lot more purchase on your own emotional life. You find that your own emotional life is more available to you. And to practice Musar, you need to have availability of your own emotional life. You need to work with your emotions and be able to spiritually configure your emotions and not have them just be in charge of you. And meditation really helps you to have an honest, sensitive relationship to your own human emotions. So it's a beautiful, there's a lot of overlap. It's a beautiful practice. Mm-hmm.
Well, here's a great question. Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that is spoken about in the mystical traditions. And Jay is asking, is there a Jewish equivalent?
I think there is. I mean, then we have to also like go into what do we mean by enlightenment and what is it meant, what's meant by that in various traditions.
Right.
And I think popularly people think of enlightenment as a whiz-bango aha experience, like all of a sudden kazam, I have this. They think of it as like an LSD experience or like a Walt Disney, like
Fantasia.
things are coming out of your head and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, that we do have very powerful spiritual experiences from time to time. And certainly in Judaism, the Torah is actually, isn't it, a record of high points in the history of human beings having, I mean, you could say that you could read Torah and say, let's look in Torah for only those moments when human beings encounter God directly, which happens in Torah, right? Abraham, Moses, and so on. Those moments are templates for the experience of awakening. But awakening is more than just a Bafo experience, because people have big experiences and then they go bananas, and they go down the drain sometimes. So the experience is not a guarantee of anything. The guarantee is the ongoing practice, the daily practice. So really, enlightenment is daily practice. I think that's what enlightenment is. And certainly in Judaism, you certainly have the equivalent of that. Judaism is nothing but, I mean, if you were a practicing Jew, a punctilious observation you would be practicing all the time. Every time you ate something, every time you entered a room, every time you had a thought, morning, afternoon, and evening prayer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Daily practice is enlightenment.
Right. And so, we have in Judaism this prayer, and let's just say it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'achayanu v'kiyumanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh, and zeh, and zeh, and zeh. Thank you, God, for letting us have this experience together this morning, and for allowing us to reach this moment, and this one, and this one, and this one. Thank you, Norman Fischer. I'll end with one question, which is, can we do a retreat together at some point? So God willing, maybe a year from now, we'd love to do a spiritual retreat and have you be our special guest.
Well, maybe I can come back in the spring or summer, because I have a new book coming out. And
Tell us, what's the name of it?
It's funny, because I had planned on, I had a little talk planned, but this was so easy. I didn't have to talk any talk. All I had to do is answer questions, so that it can't be any easier than that. That's very good. So no, my new book is called, let me see if I have it right. When you greet me, I bow. Something like notes and reflections from 30 years of spiritual practice. And it's a collection of many, many essays that I wrote about Buddhism over a 30-year period, with contemporary notes where I reflect on those essays. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, like about politics and religion, all kinds of stuff people might be interested in. So I'd love to come back when that book comes out and present it to you and talk about it, and then we can talk widely about whatever's on anybody's mind.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah,
Rabbi Feinstein, any final word?
Very grateful. We're grateful for your time this morning, but grateful as well that you're so generous in sharing your wisdom. And especially in moments like this, when we're separated by these screens, but to be able to reach out and share your wisdom and your soul, it's been a great privilege, Norman. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm so glad that I was able to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norman. And thank you all for joining us this morning.
Well,
Reminder that every Tuesday morning and every Wednesday morning, we have our own Jewish meditation. And so invite you to be a part of that. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.